A few years ago, I was actually talking to a guy who was on the board of 5 companies, which corporate governance people might tell you was too many. And I asked him what issues he was hearing. And this was about 2-3 years ago. And he said, you know, for the first time in my life, I'm hearing really serious board-level conversations about sustainability and corporate social responsibility that are more than lip service, more than, oh, we got to keep these NGOs from harassing us too much, that we're really engaged. Tom Stewart, Chief Marketing and Knowledge Officer of Booz & Company. It was a very interesting study that was done in 2003 by the World Resources Institute in conjunction with a Swiss financial firm called Sustainable Asset Management, in which they took a look at the world's automobile companies and they plotted them on your classic 2x2 matrix as to how much risk they would face in a carbon-constrained world and how much opportunity they would get from a carbon-constrained world. And what they found by looking at quality of management, products in the pipeline, so on and so forth, up in the upper right-hand quadrant, where you would find the least amount of risk and the greatest amount of opportunity, where Toyota, Nissan, Renault, and I think Honda was just off, or just on the edge of that upper right-hand quadrant. And down in the end, down to the lower left, where you had the least opportunity and the greatest risk, where I think BMW, Ford, General Motors, and so on and so forth. That was 2003. It's now 6 years later. I think that the shareholders of those companies that were in the upper right-hand quadrant are a lot happier than the shareholders, or maybe I should say now the bondholders, of those companies that were in the lower left-hand quadrant. So there is pretty good evidence that you can actually understand the long-run opportunities and the long-run risks, and that it is worthwhile for your company and for your investors to take action on that insight. Part of it is driven by issues of globalization, because suddenly when you're working in a number of markets, some of them emerging, some of them fully developed, the status and role of the corporation in society is different. And the old models seem to require a much more board level and proactive, if you'll forgive the jargon, approach from a company. The way I've seen it mostly play out is, and most intensely play out right now, is in the area of climate change and carbon, and what are we going to do to move to a low carbon economy, or at least a carbon constrained economy. And there's a little framework that I like to think of using, which is used by John Holdren, who is formerly of Harvard, now an advisor to the Obama administration, who says when it comes to climate change, there are 3 things that are going to happen. There can be mitigation, trying to prevent it. There can be adaptation, or there can be suffering. And the more you mitigate, the less you have to adapt, and the more you can mitigate and adapt, the less you have to suffer, but there's going to be something along all 3. Now, it's well above my pay grade to think about that on a sort of a global policy level, but you can also adapt that same little model to a company or to an organization. What can I do to mitigate my contribution to global warming, to mitigate my carbon footprint, and so on and so forth? What can I do to adapt to a carbon-constrained world? And what can I do if I'm going to end up suffering from a carbon-constrained world, and how do I deal with that? So it's with that framework that I think that CEOs and boards need to be looking at a series of very high-level questions that are much more than, you know, should I take out the incandescent light bulbs and screw in the compact fluorescent light bulbs, but really are 5 enterprise-wide, board-level issues that will help them think about their world, their role in a carbon-constrained world, how to mitigate, adapt, and avoid suffering in it. And by extension, this actually is a model I think that can apply to most of the sustainability issues that you see.